Hello everyone, welcome back to Study Tips for IGCSE Biology. Today's topic is related to classification. In this topic, you will find out about the 7 characteristics that distinguish living things from non-living objects, why it is important to classify organisms, naming organisms using the binomial system, how DNA-based sequences help with classification, the character features of animals including arthropods and vertebrates, and finally the features of bacteria, fungi, prokaryotes, and problem of classifying viruses. So, without delay, let's begin with. First and foremost, characteristic of living things. We have identified 7 characteristics of living things. Firstly, growth. All organisms begin small and get larger by the growth of their cells and by adding new cells to their bodies. And on top of that, the characteristic of living things is movement. All organisms are able to move to some extent. Most animals can move their whole body from place to place, and plants can slowly move part of themselves. And thirdly, we have sensitivity. All organisms pick up information about changes in the environment and react to the changes. Example, from this picture, we have type of plants. But whenever we touch the leaf slip off. Excretion. Excretions mean all organisms produce unwanted or toxic waste product as a result of their metabolic reactions. So in this example, if you can see from the photo, so the leaf produce extra water, excess water. Then you can see the bubbles coming up from the leaf. On top of that, the characteristic of living things is reproduction, the process that makes more of the same kind of organism. And other than that, nutrition. So organisms take substances from their environment and use them for energy, growth, and development. For example, we have plants is get sun, water to make the process of photosynthesis. Therefore, nutrition and for the plant's growth, energy, and development. And finally, we have respiration, the chemical reactions in cells that break down nutrient molecules and release energy for metabolism. Classification. Classification means putting things into groups. Example, we could group living organisms with legs into one group and all these without legs into another. Or we could put all red organisms into one group and all blue ones into another. Why classification of living things are important? Why? First, it helps in the identifications of living organisms. Number 2, it helps in understanding the diversity of living organisms. And number 3, learn about different kinds of plant, animals, their features, similarities, and differences. And number 4, you can understand how complex organisms evolve from simpler organisms. Ways to identify classification in the past history. If you can see or if you go through the history, in the past, the only ways the biologists could decide which organisms were most closely related to each other was to study the structure of their bodies. So they look carefully at their morphology, means that the overall forms, the shape of their bodies, such as whether they had legs or wings, and their anatomy, the details body structure, which could be determined by dissection. So we still use this method of classification today, but we now have new tools to work out evolutionary relationships. And one of the most powerful of these is the study of DNA. DNA. What is DNA? DNA is the chemical from which our chromosomes are made. It is genetic material passed on from one generation to the next. So, the next chapter, we will study details about the DNA, the structure. So, if I'm not mistaken, this will be in the chapter 4. Okay, so in this chapter later on, you will find out that each DNA molecule is made up of string of smallest molecules, which containing 4 different bases. So this base called A, C, G, and T, which can be arranged in the order. Biologists can compare the sequences of base in the DNA of organism from 2 different species. The more similar the base sequences, the more closely related the species are to one another. So they have a more recent common ancestor than species that have DNA base sequences that are less similar. So the similarities in sequences of amino acid in proteins can be used in the same way. Okay, the classification system which was introduced by Swedish naturalist called Linnaeus, he divided all the different kind of living things into group called species. So he gave every species of living organism 2 names written in Latin called binomial naming system. Okay, how living organisms are classified? So we have kingdoms animals. Inside the kingdom animals, is actually classified into several classes. Let's say we have phylum vertebrates. Phylum vertebrate itself, it can be divided into 5 subclasses. Class fish, class reptiles, class birds, class mammalia, class amphibians. And then we have phylum arthropods, which is inside the phylum arthropods, we have a class of insects. And then we have phylum annelids, phylum mollusks, and phylum nematodes. And let's look at the phylum vertebrates. If you can see from the previous screen, phylum vertebrates is subdivided into several classes. First of all, we look into these are animals with a supporting rod running along the length of the body. And the most familiar ones have backbone called vertebrates. Okay, let's look at the class fish. Class fish. All fish in the water, except for 1 or 2, like the mud skipper, which spend short period of time breathing air. And the characteristic is vertebrate with scaly skin, have gills, have fins. If you can see from the diagram of the fish, where the fish consists of dorsal fin, operculum covering gills, streamlined body covered in scale. You also have pectoral fin, pelvic fin, anal fin, and caudal fin. Okay, this is the class fish. And let's look at the class birds. Class bird, the birds like reptiles, lay eggs with waterproof shells. And the characteristic vertebrate with featured feathers. 4 limbs have become winged. Lay eggs with hard shell. Have a big heart, has 4 chambers. And if you look at the pictures, this consists of big body covered with feathers. This is the classification of birds. Okay, let's look under category of class amphibian. Amphibian, for example, given here is a frog. Frog is amphibian. So, although most adult amphibians live on land, they always go back to water to breed. like frogs, toads, and salamanders are all amphibians. So the characteristic, they have vertebrates with moist, scale, less skin. If you can see, thin, moist skin, lay eggs in water. Adult often live on land. The frog often live on land. Larva has gills, adult have lungs. And if you see the class of reptiles, okay, the class of reptiles you can see here is snake. These are the crocodiles, lizard, snakes, turtle, tortoise. Reptiles do not need to go back to the water to breed because eggs have waterproof shell which stop from dying out. The characteristic of reptiles, vertebrates with scaly skin, lay eggs with rubbery shells. Okay, this is a continuation of phylum vertebrates, where class mammals, which is mammalia. So in this, human belongs to this group. The characteristic vertebrates with hair, like human being with hair, have a placenta. Okay. Young feed on milk from mammary glands. Endothermic, have a diaphragm. Heart have 4 chambers and have different type of teeth. Okay, incisors, canines, premolar, and molar. So these are the characteristics of mammalia. Okay, let's look at the phylum Arthropods. Arthropods are animals with jointed legs but no backbone. They have a waterproof exoskeleton that has allowed them to live on dry land. And the characteristic, if you see locust, several pairs of jointed leg. See, jointed leg. And exoskeleton. So, example given here for phylum Arthropod is moth and locust. You can see from the diagram as attached here, the insects are very successful group of animals. Their success is mostly due to their exoskeletons and tracheas, which are very good at stopping water from evaporating from insect body so they can live in a dry places. The characteristic, arthropod with 3 pairs of jointed legs. If you can see, jointed leg on the other side, also got 2 pairs of wings, breathe through trachea, body divided into head, thorax, and abdomen. You can see the locust, head, thorax, and abdomen. Okay, so this is a wing of the locust, this is a jointed leg, and this is antenna. Okay, these are the types of crustacean. Okay, the example given here is a crab. These are crab, lobster, and wood lice. They breathe through gills. Most of them live in a wet place and many are aquatic. Okay, so the characteristic of crustacean is arthropods with more than 4 pairs of jointed legs. If you see the crab, okay, they got the claw, jointed leg here, okay, not millipede or centipede. We are not talking about, they are not the type of millipede or centipede, breathe through gills. Okay, and then arachnids. The example given here is spider. These are the spider, ticks, and scorpion. They are land-dwelling organisms. The characteristic of arachnids is also arthropods with 4 pairs of jointed legs, breathe through gills called book lungs. Okay. And myriapod. Myriapod, example given here is a centipedes, where these are the centipedes and millipedes. The characteristic is body consists of many segments. You can see here, and many segments. And each segment has jointed leg. For each segment, long thin segment body. Okay, and then we have fungi. Fungi were classified as a plant. However, they are different and belong in their own kingdom. We have found many different uses to make of fungi. We eat them as mushroom. We use the unusual fungus yeast to make ethanol and bread. We obtain antibiotics such as penicillin from various different fungi. Some fungi are harmful. Some cause food decay. A few cause diseases, including ringworm and athlete's foot. And the characteristic of the fungi is usually is multicellular, which is why it's multicellular, it consists of many cells. Has nucleus, have cell wall not made of cellulose, do not have chlorophyll, and feed by staphylococcus or parasitic nutrition. So if you see the sample of fungi is they got sporangium containing spores and aerial hypa. This is the you can see from here, and then this is the root part where you have a feeding hypa, and this is actually you can see through the microscope of the bread mold what is actually when you eat the bread which is already expired. So these are the things fungi is actually a leaf on top of your bread. Okay, so this is edible mushroom. So you can see this type of when you enlarge the picture of the mushroom. You have the cap here, gill bearing spores inside here, and mycelium. Okay, this is the root part. So this is where it says that it's harm to the human. So when you eat bread which is already expired, it might cause you vomiting and stomach ache and diarrhea and so on. So these are the things. If you can see how the fungi live on top of your on top of the bread. Okay, Protoclista. Protoclista, the kingdom Protoclista contain quite a mixture of organisms. They have cell with nucleus, but some have plant like cell with chloroplast and cellulose, cell wall, which while others have animals like cells without these features. So most Protoclista are unicellular, which means that is a single cell, such seaweed, such a single cell, such seaweeds are multicellular. If you see seaweed, if you eat seaweed, seaweed consists of multicellular, which is more than one cell. So the characteristic of Protoclista is multicellular, which is many cells, or unicellular, and cell have a nucleus. Okay, and cells may or may not have a cell wall and chloroplast. Some feed by photosynthesis and other feeds on organic substance made by other organisms. Prokaryotes. Prokaryotes is a bacteria, is a kind of bacteria. Okay, and bacteria have cells different from the cell of all other kinds of organisms. And the most important difference is that they do not have nucleus. And some of them are harmful to us and cause diseases such as TB, tuberculosis, and you cough, non-stop cough, and cholera. Some bacteria can carry photosynthesis. And characteristic of the prokaryotes is often unicellular, single cell, have no nucleus, have cell wall, not made of cellulose, and have no mitochondria. And viruses. You can see from this picture. If you, this is a picture taken from the simple virus, where they have a protein code, genetic material RNA. So this is viruses. What is viruses? Viruses is a cause common diseases such as cold, influenza, and AIDS. Viruses are not considered to be alive. until they get into living cell. They can take over the cell's machinery to make multiple copies of themselves. Okay, these new viruses burst out. So the cell and invades others whether the process is repeated. So the diagram shows one kind of virus. It is not made of a cell. It is simply a piece of DNA or RNA, which is chemically similar to DNA, surrounded by a protein coat. And the scale bar represents a length of 10 nanometers. And 1 nanometers is 1 times 10 to the power of negative 9 millimeter. So in other words, you could line up more than 15,000 of these viruses between 2 of the millimeters mark on your rulers, which is very, very tiny, very, very small. The viruses you cannot see from your naked eyes. So with that, I would like to end this chapter presentation. Thank you very much.